I have always found the topic of love and infatuation fascinating. For example, I have a few friends who met their partners in their early 20s, got married, had children, and they have pretty healthy relationships. On the other hand, I also have friends who are now in their early 40s and normal relationships seem impossible for them. They fall in love with really difficult people and they find themselves in extremely complicated situations over and over and over again. Is this really just being unlucky in love? I believe that people fall in love in very different ways. They enter relationships in different ways. They have very different expectations. And I also believe that relationships are probably the most important part of life, or at least one of the most important parts of life. And it's absolutely worth investing time and energy into analyzing them, learning from our mistakes, and trying to improve the way we relate to others and to ourselves. And because most romantic relationships begin with falling in love, in this series I will explore why and how we fall in love with a specific person and not someone else. The series is divided into 4 parts. Each part looks at a different layer of why we fall in love, and this series is especially relevant if you have unresolved trauma and you find yourself repeating the same relationship patterns over and over and over again. So this is the first part. Today we're going to talk about infatuation as a projection. The first thing you need to understand about falling in love or infatuation is that we don't really fall in love with people. We fall in love with our own projections. Most people believe that when they fall in love, they're responding to another person, their personality, qualities. But many of our most intense romantic experiences seem to follow a different logic. This paradox fascinated the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. Jung believed that what we call romantic infatuation often has less to do with the other person than we would like to admit. In fact, he suggested that during the early stages of attraction, we are frequently relating not to the person, but to an image that has emerged from our own unconscious mind. According to Jung, every human being carries hidden aspects of themselves, and there are qualities we have never fully developed, desires we have never expressed, emotional capacities we have neglected and often had to suppress very deeply. These parts do not disappear. They continue to exist between the surface of awareness, influencing our perceptions and shaping our relationships in ways we rarely recognize. When we encounter someone who seems to embody these hidden qualities, something extraordinary can happen. We begin to project our unconscious material onto them. Suddenly they appear fascinating, mysterious, and even magical. The attraction feels as though it's coming from them, but psychologically speaking, much of this intensity may actually be coming from us. So imagine a woman who has spent most of her life being responsible, controlled, practical. She has learned to suppress adventure and being spontaneous because this seemed unsafe or immature, and she's probably learned that in her early childhood. One day she meets a man who appears free-spirited and unconventional, and she feels instantly captivated. On the surface, she believes she is attracted to him, but at a deeper level, she may be responding to a part of herself that has remained undeveloped or suppressed for many years. The freedom she sees in him is not merely his quality, it's her own unlived potential calling for recognition. And the same process occurs in many different forms. For example, a man disconnected from his emotional life may become fascinated by a deeply feeling woman. Someone who's never trusted their creativity may become obsessed with an artist. Someone who has always doubted their own strength may find themselves incredibly drawn to a very confident, assertive partner. In each case, the attraction is not really about the other person, it's also about a hidden aspect of the self-seeking expression. This is one reason infatuation can feel almost spiritual, and what seems like the discovery of a soulmate may, in part, be the discovery of a hidden part of ourselves. This is why infatuation frequently begins to fade as genuine intimacy develops. The more we get to know someone, the harder it becomes to maintain this projection, and reality gradually intrudes. We discover flaws, contradictions, insecurities, limitations, and the person who seemed perfect reveals themselves to be human. Many relationships struggle at precisely this point. People assume that the loss of intensity means they have fallen out of love. Yet, from a Jungian perspective, something else may be happening. The projection is dissolving and the fantasy is giving way to reality. The psychological image we created can no longer be sustained. The process can be surprisingly painful. We often believe we're grieving the person, but sometimes what we're really grieving is the collapse of an illusion. The idealized figure who existed in our imagination disappears, and we're left to face with an ordinary human being. For some, this marks the end of attraction. For others, it marks the beginning of genuine love. Real love begins where projection ends. It begins when we stop expecting another person to carry the missing parts of ourselves and instead begin to reclaim them as our own. The qualities we admire in others, creativity, courage, emotional depth, are often not entirely theirs, but reflections of something within us that wants to be recognized, developed, integrated. And from this perspective, infatuation is not just a romantic accident, it's a message from the unconscious. The people who affect us more strongly may not simply be showing who they are, but who we might become. This is why certain people enter our lives with such intensity. They're not necessarily our destiny, but our mirrors. And what we call falling in love may actually be an encounter with our own unfinished self. When projection becomes extreme, the split between the fantasy and the real person becomes too deep, and we move beyond ordinary infatuation into what is called limerence. This is when fantasy replaces reality and we become deeply attached to the fantasy or to the imagined version of the other person. Limerence often serves as a way of regulating ourselves. And limerence is especially common in people with trauma, whose primary trauma response is dissociation. It's also common in people who think they want intimacy, but parts of their unconsciousness are terrified of it. Let me know if this resonated with you. In the next part of the series, we will explore a darker side of infatuation, which is called compulsive repetition. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out. And I'll see you very, very soon. Thank you for being here.